Two meetings, one in Delhi, one in Islamabad, size up the situation in Afghanistan. We're going to take a look at how they differed, where they actually had some similarities, and how the region is responding to both.
Now, India has invited Iran, Russia and all 5 Central Asian countries, including Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, to participate in the NSA-level meet on Afghanistan today in Delhi.
But this time, of course, it is crucial given the fact that Afghanistan has a changeover. This is the first meeting on Afghanistan India is hosting since Taliban takeover in August, and the focus is on the deteriorating situation when it comes to the humanitarian situation in the country.
मैं नहीं जाऊंगा एक स्पॉइलर जो है वो पीसमेकर बनने की कोशिश नहीं कर सकता.
We keep hearing that Pakistan is a victim of terrorism. This is the country which is an arsonist disguising itself as a firefighter.
Hello and welcome to Worldview at The Hindu with me, Suhasini Haidar. Now, the two meetings with two sets of countries in two neighbouring capitals brought out two different declarations. Delhi hosted the Regional Security Dialogue with 7 regional players, including Russia, Iran, and 5 Central Asian countries, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. Islamabad hosted the Troika Plus meeting, or the extended Troika as it's known, with 3 Security Council members, US, Russia, and China, and then had them meet the Taliban acting foreign minister. We'll tell you why in just a bit. Russia was the only country that sent a delegate both to Delhi and to Islamabad, and the US Special Envoy Thomas West, who went to Islamabad, is due to visit Delhi next. So the first question, what was Delhi really trying to achieve from the NSA meeting? Remember, it's the third of a series. The first 2 of these NSA meetings were held in Iran in 2018 and 2019. The first point is that India really wishes to remain an important, engaged player in the future of Afghanistan. It should not be cut out of the discussion. Remember, the Iran foreign minister, for example, a few weeks ago invited foreign ministers of the region but left out India. In the past, India has protested when Moscow has left India out of the talks, and certainly the Troika Plus does not include New Delhi as well. The second point is that with the exit of the US and NATO troops from Afghanistan, it is clear that the solution to the situation there, the threats that come from Afghanistan on terrorism, on drugs, on migration, really have to be solved with a consensus in Afghanistan's extended neighborhood, and that includes Russia, of course. The third point being that the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan should become the region's immediate priority. New Delhi making the point that political differences must be set aside, and therefore had invited both Pakistan and China, which it does not have very good relations with at present. It also shows in a way that Pakistan is really part of the problem. Pakistan's attitude in not attending the meeting, in making statements against India, in refusing to take India's proposal to send humanitarian aid over its land route, those are all part of the problem, apart from, of course, the safe havens to terrorists and terrorist groups that Pakistan has been hosting. What were Islamabad's gains really from this Troika, extended Troika meeting, particularly given the timing, the same week as the Indian meeting? The first really is that Pakistan wishes to demonstrate that Pakistan is the most important player vis-a-vis Afghanistan today, that is after the Taliban takeover of Kabul. And the invitation to the Taliban Foreign Minister Muttaqi to meet with the envoys from US, Russia and China is really an indicator of that Pakistan in a way is the interlocutor. Secondly, Pakistan wants the international community really to help with monetary assistance for Afghanistan to prevent both a bankruptcy of the government there or the Taliban regime there, as well as a civil war that could well spill over into Pakistan as it has in the past. And the third point is by bringing the P3 or the 3 Security Council members to Islamabad, Pakistan really wants to show that far from blaming Pakistan for the problems in Afghanistan, something India has spoken about often, it is actually part of the solution. So in a sense, also countering a lot of the narrative that had come out of New Delhi. Now, joint statements were issued after both meetings, and you'll be surprised by how similar they actually were. The Delhi meetings, Delhi Declaration as it was called, focused on terrorism and radicalization and stopping their spread from Afghanistan, stopping the production of opium and the spread of drugs worldwide, dealing with the humanitarian crisis, calling for a more inclusive government in Kabul and the rights of women and minorities to be secured, as well as the role of the United Nations to be put front and center. No mention, however, was made of any engagement with the Taliban in the Delhi Declaration. In fact, the word Taliban wasn't mentioned at all. Now, the Islamabad meeting, let's just take a look at their joint statement, also referred to terrorism as one of the big threats. Afghanistan must not allow the export of terrorism. Also on drugs, there was language about the humanitarian crisis in the Islamabad statement, a call for an inclusive government to replace the interim government by the Taliban, as well as the role of the UN. But the Islamabad statement, the declaration coming from Pakistan, added two more. The Troika Plus actually pushed for what they call practical engagement with the Taliban. That is certainly interesting, that they want practical engagement with the Taliban, and it also pushed, as the US has consistently said, for safe passage of Afghans who want to leave Afghanistan, i.e. dealing with the issue of refugees. This is going to be one of the issues that will come up in the next few months as well. And while there's been clear consensus on most of the other issues, as I've pointed out to you, whether it has been an inclusive government, whether it has been the call against terrorism, drugs, the role of the UN, there are these few issues in which India seems to still diverge, not just from Pakistan, but from the US, China, and regional countries, the rest of the neighborhood, including Iran. And this is a place where New Delhi and diplomats in Delhi will have to focus on in the next few months. The first is the engagement with Pakistan. The truth is that every country except India in this process has actually got a working relationship with Pakistan. They have dialogues with Pakistan about Afghanistan. New Delhi has refused to hold those dialogues with Pakistan in any bilateral context. As I told you, Pakistan refused to come to the Delhi meeting on Afghanistan. The two have sent leaders, have sent ministers to SCO meetings or to the Uzbekistan, Central Asia, South Asia meeting, but not actually engaging with each other on any of these issues. Of course, India's issues with cross-border terrorism, Pakistan's issues over Kashmir are a big part of that. The second divergence between New Delhi and the rest is on the engagement with the Taliban. Although no country really has recognized the Taliban interim government, all the countries in both those meetings are actually engaging the leadership in some form. India wants to underline the fact that no country wishes to legitimize the interim Taliban government. But take a look at the kind of engagement there is. Russia and Iran, for example, have engaged the Taliban for quite some time, invited leaders to their capitals, and they maintain embassies in Kabul even today. In a departure from the Delhi Declaration, in fact, Russia issued a separate statement alongside the MEA's statements when their NSA equivalent, General Patrushev, came to Delhi. So there's a definite divergence there. Turkmenistan has in the past sent a ministerial level delegation to discuss connectivity with the Taliban. In particular, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India TAPI pipeline. India may or may not be a part of that, but Turkmenistan definitely wants to continue with its engagement on the issue. Uzbekistan as well has accepted a visit by the Taliban Deputy PM Hanafi and discussed trade, transit, connectivity, going ahead with the railway project with Afghanistan. And this is all with the Taliban regime, making it clear that they expect to have some kind of normalcy in their engagement as well. Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan have both sent high-ranking delegations to Kabul to talk to the Taliban foreign minister. They've met with the Taliban prime minister as well, deputy prime minister as well. Tajikistan has engaged the Taliban less than the others in Central Asia. It's even believed to have hosted the National Resistance Front, made it clear it will not recognize a Taliban-only government, but engagement as a land border nation remains. India, on the contrary, has had only two official meetings with the Taliban, one between the Indian ambassador in Doha and Taliban representatives, and the other in Moscow, where MEA officials met with the Taliban deputy prime minister. Now, the third big divergence has really been on the issue of refugees. And this is why it is that the region has in fact opened their doors in smaller or larger numbers to Afghan refugees, both after 1996 when the Taliban first took over, but also after 15th August 2021. Pakistan and Iran have always taken in the bulk of the refugees, many of them fleeing over the borders. And even prior to 2021, if you look at the numbers, Pakistan was housing about 1.5 million. Iran housed about 800,000 Afghans. This is in 2020. After the Kabul takeover, tens of thousands more have fled to those two countries. Amongst the neighbors in the region, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan have offered transit space for refugees, especially those bound for the US and Europe, and also given landing rights to evacuation flights, including those that India had needed. From the 1990s, Russia, of course, had taken in about 100,000 Afghans. They don't give them citizenship. And after the fall of Kabul, again, Russia didn't say, send your refugees to us, but offered to fly out the Afghan refugees to other countries, offered their civilian planes for that. The US took in about 120,000 refugees actually after August the 15th. And some of them are in different parts of the world being processed before they go to the US. In the 1990s, India had in fact taken as many as 12,000 Afghan refugees. This time around, though, the scenario is very different. India has taken a decision, it would seem, from the government not to allow Afghans to seek asylum or travel here in general. Shortly after the Taliban takeover of Kabul, the Modi government actually decided to cancel all pre-existing visas to Afghans and to only allow them in on the basis of e-visas. And very few e-visas have actually been issued so far. So what is it that Afghans themselves are looking to India for? As part of a discussion organized by the Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies, I spoke to a few Afghan experts, a diplomat, an academic, and the foreign affairs representative of the National Resistance Force about what their expectations from India were. Listen in.
The National Resistance Front is thankful to the international community, especially our allies, for preventing the recognition of a terrorist group as Afghanistan's government, as Afghanistan's representatives. One. Two, I believe just how we're in shock at the moment, even though we're almost in the third month and the shock isn't over. The region is also in shock. So we cannot judge things at the moment. I believe we need time to pass and then judge who did what and why.
When it comes to giving the Taliban legitimacy, they don't care whether you give them legitimacy or not, whether it's India or the US or whoever. So this is something that you need to keep in mind, because the 4 countries that give them legitimacy during the first 5 years, today are not giving them legitimacy, but some of them have embassies within Afghanistan, right? That means that some form of relationship is on. So this is something that I think it's important to keep in mind. Now, I might not agree with you that the international community, the UN, India can do much when it comes to humanitarian assistance or, for example, education or having people-to-people relationship. This is extremely important as a strategic objective, I think, for those countries that want to be involved, actively in Afghanistan, to find ways. And there are ways. For example, UNICEF is found technologically a way to be able to distribute money to people of Afghanistan without going through the Taliban. There are Afghans in the community now there. There's again a danger that if it doesn't go through the Taliban, they can rule with the power of the gun. So how do you deal with it internationally? This is something that needs to be discussed, but there are ways, and those ways must be explored.
I'm not very satisfied with India's performance. India's done the least in terms of providing, relief assistance, even, taking refugees. I think there are more refugees going to Iran and Pakistan, despite the complaints that we have had, than to India. All we see, to be honest, is more talk and talking about the $3 billion that, of course, we appreciate, we're grateful for, but as the largest democracy, so much expectations that Afghans have, including myself. That's why I set the stage, and we heard from Ms. Najibullah and others who have lived in India. I think whether the current administration, whether, whatever the issues and the challenges that better, I think has not really lived up as a good neighbor, as a neighbor that is most favored and most loved, and really on a people-to-people level.
Some very sharp views there. Clearly, India's desire to lead conversations on Afghanistan's future, as demonstrated by the National Security Advisor's dialogue, is a worthy goal for a regional leader like India. But it really can only be fulfilled once the government in Delhi more clearly defines what it wants its role to be in Afghanistan. What kind of engagement will it hold, even with a government that it has no ties with? There are lots of questions on this edition of Worldview. I'm going to leave you with a few book recommendations. Obviously, on Afghanistan, we'll keep updating this list. The first is a book I think I've spoken about before, but it's worth reading because it is so up to date on India's role in Afghanistan. Quest for a Stable Afghanistan by Shajit Sarkar, who was based there. There's also a new book by Dr. Ashok Bahuria, who is author of India's Neighborhood, on the strategic challenges there. And this is about the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, what's known as the Pakistani Taliban as opposed to the Afghan Taliban, and its origin, evolution, and portents. There are several books on US-Pakistan relations when it comes to Afghanistan that are just out, and I'll just mention a few of them. There's No-Win War, The Paradox of US-Pakistan Relations in Afghanistan's Shadow. This is by Zahid Hussain, a famous journalist, author of Frontline Pakistan, also of a book called Scorpion's Tail. It's certainly worth a read. There's Bob Woodward's from the US book called Peril, which really speaks about the last part of the Trump presidency and how they dealt with the Afghanistan question. Very interesting views over there, and a year later, much more important to read. And the third is The Battle for Pakistan, The Bitter US Friendship and a Tough Neighborhood by Shuja Nawaz. Each of them worth reading, and we certainly do hope you'll join us again for more on our next edition of Worldview. From the team here, thanks for watching.